Hello, welcome to the second session of Learning to Love, in which we're going to look at some fictitious case studies. But as we said in the first session, one of the main aims that I certainly have in this time together is to encourage you to really see something more to sexuality than just about sex. That actually, I believe our sexual feelings very often say an awful lot about ourselves. I suppose that's stating the obvious in some ways, but also they may well be saying an awful lot about our own journey through life, our own early experiences, for example. This isn't going to be as obvious in some cases, of course, but I think very often we can learn an awful lot about ourselves and our own journeys through life, and also maybe other people as well, through looking at sexual feelings and desires and seeing what they're saying to us about maybe what's going on in our lives, but also what's been going on in the past. And I say there's no clear blueprint here, and it may be more true for some people than for others. So let's start by looking at some case studies. First of all, an extended Christian family community, living together in a house together, committed to each other in close relationships, of course, because of a Christian community, an extended family as it's often called. And the people involved are Damien, Richard and Jane, and Sally and Alec. Firstly, Damien. Damien's 24, he's single and is seeking to be celibate, but he really struggles with pornography, and he's sexually attracted to young women, especially those who are overweight and sexually active. He himself is tall and slim. Then there's Richard, who's 40, and Jane, who's 39. They've been happily married for 15 years and have 2 children. Jane has been aware of some sexual feelings for women in the past, but she enjoys a fulfilling sexual relationship with Richard. Richard would describe himself as thoroughly heterosexual and not really aware of any extramarital sexual temptations. They have been faithful to each other sexually in their marriage. So that's Richard and Jane. Another couple in the community are Sally and Alec. Sally is 52 and Alec is 55. And they've been married for 30 years. Their 2 children have both left home. They would have described themselves as strongly heterosexual. They both had extramarital heterosexual relationships and used to describe their marriage as an open relationship. This was before they became Christians 6 years ago, when they decided against continuing to go down that path because of their Christian faith. When they all decided to live together as a family stroke community, it was understood that they'd be totally honest with each other and they would have a very close emotional bonding as Christian brothers and sisters. Damien, the single guy, was totally honest with the other members of the household about his struggle with pornography, and he had a mutual accountability agreement with Alec. This was very effective in terms of the pornography, but it became evident that he had some obsessive compulsive issues, and his addictive tendencies could easily turn to something else. If he dealt with one, it could often be replaced by another addiction of one sort or another. So Damien decided to try some psychotherapy to see if it would help some of these conflicts in his lives. And he's been finding the psychotherapy helpful. Richard and Jane, the first couple we mentioned, have been Christians for longer than other members of the household. And therefore, in a sense, they tended to take something of a spiritual lead. Neither of them are aware of any struggles with their sexuality. They would describe themselves as sensitive to the needs of others and generally, I suppose, interested in the arts, artistic, and so on. I suppose that's how they would describe their personalities and their interests. Now, Sally and Alec, that's the couple who did have extramarital relationships in the past, they have both strong personalities. And Alec is a very keen sportsman, especially rugby, more recently golf, I think, since he's a little bit older, I guess. They would describe themselves as free spirits in many ways. Sally is actually a social worker and she strongly opposes prejudice in all its forms. Sally has developed a very strong emotional bonding for Jane, but she's found, to her horror in a way, that in that emotional bonding there are also quite strong sexual feelings. She's never had these feelings for another woman before, and although she's always been very accepting of other people with homosexual issues, she found it very difficult, if not impossible, to accept in herself. It was really freaking her out in lots of ways that she'd suddenly become aware of same-sex attractions. Now Jane, who had been aware of sexual same-sex feelings in the past, Jane was unaware of Sally's feelings, but she could see that something was upsetting her in a big way. Alec didn't know what was troubling Sally, but he assumed it might be menopausal. Then Alec was shocked in his own life by the emergence of very strong feelings, sexual feelings for Damien. Again, Alec had never been aware of same-sex attractions or feelings before, and he regarded himself as pretty strongly heterosexual in lots of ways. So he was quite shocked too by these strong feelings that had emerged for Damien, who didn't really respond in any way at all or encourage him, because he wasn't sexually attracted to Alec at all. In fact, Alec said, "I think I've fallen in love with him. I've never had these feelings before. I'm straight." Now, Damien had no idea about Alex's feelings. Their personalities and their interests are very different in lots of ways. But Damien found Alec's strength, his honesty and his self-awareness very helpful as an accountability partner. He never felt judged by Alec. So they had a good accountability relationship in that sense. Alec hadn't shared his feelings for Damien with anyone else, but he wonders if he should withdraw from the accountability arrangement because of his strong feelings for Damien, and because he didn't really want Damien to know about his sexual feelings for him. I wonder how you feel about these relationships. Do they surprise you? Something maybe you've been aware of yourself? Something you've known in other people? Or is it something that you didn't really conceive could ever happen? That people who at once were not aware of any same-sex feelings or attractions suddenly find quite strong same-sex feelings and attractions in their own lives. What do you think God says to you about through this in terms of your own feelings and reactions? Maybe that's difficult for you to answer. Ultimately, in this situation, both the married couples were divorced in a reasonably amicable kind of way. Damien, the single guy, joined a monastery. Richard has become a Roman Catholic priest. And Jane and Sally's relationship has developed, and they are considering marriage. Alec, who was married to Sally, is single. now. Well, he's divorced, obviously, but he's single now. But he has got a girlfriend. So that's the current state of play, if you like, in terms of that situation. I'm going to suggest now that you pause the video, or if you're watching it on your own, or if you're watching it in a group, just pause the video and maybe think through some of those situations. I guess it's a bit complicated, really, to take it all in. I hope you've been able to do that. In a conference scenario, of course, it would be written down. But maybe just spend a moment or two looking at that situation and your own feelings about it and how you're reacting to it. So just pause the tape at this time. Okay, now we're going to go on to the next case study. This involves Jim, who's 33, and Joyce, who's 68. So obviously a huge age difference there. Jim and Joyce met online. Jim says he is only attracted to older women. He has always struggled to admit this to his families and friends. But he said he's never been attracted to women his own age. He's always been attracted to much older women. He's a good-looking guy, you know, in terms of how generally people would conceive good-looking. I know we all have different ideas about that, obviously, naturally. That's one of the things we're looking at. But his good looks often resulted in women trying to develop a relationship with him, usually women of similar age group. But until he met Joyce, he was reluctant to have a relationship. Joyce's husband had died 10 years ago, and she says that her loneliness actually drove her to go online to seek companionship and friendship, and hopefully a relationship. She was surprised and flattered that Jim had such strong feelings for her. And they now both believe that they're in love with each other. But the problem is that most of their friends and family have found it very difficult to accept their relationship because of the age difference. In fact, one of Joyce's friends even seemed to call her or imply that she was a paedophile because of the age difference. That's how strong some of the reactions were from Joyce's friends. How do you feel about this relationship? What do you think God says to you through this? Again, I suggest you pause the recording or the video, whatever you want to call it, for a moment or two, just to think about that, how you're feeling about this situation, how you feel about them, and what you think God may be saying to you through this. Just pause for a moment. Okay, now we'll go on to another case study. Derek is 40, and he's the pastor of a large Pentecostal church. He's been married to Jane, who's 39, for 15 years. They had 2 children. Derek admits that for the last 3 years, he's been secretly buying some female underwear. He wears it sometimes, and while he's wearing it or touching it, he's masturbating. He says in his fantasy, he is in a sense becoming the woman he is thrilling and exciting sexually. He's kind of looking down on himself, if you like, on this relationship with a woman in clothing like that I guess many would assume with being a very sexually active woman. And that's part of his fantasy, and he's using the clothing in a way to stimulate himself in that sense. He doesn't think Jane knows anything about his transvesticism. He says he has no desire to become a woman, and he's got no sexual interest in men whatsoever, he says. He has been tempted to join a transvestite club, but he feels very ashamed and guilty. All sorts of conflicts there. He would be horrified if Jane or any of his Christian friends, and especially, of course, his congregation, knew anything about his secret transvesticism. How do you feel about Derek's situation? What do you think God says to you through this? Again, now a pause until we go on to the next case study. Okay, the next one is Terry, who's 28, and Rachel, who's 26. They've been married for 5 years, and Rachel is pregnant with their first child. Terry says he's always secretly wished he was a woman. He felt like that as a child, but then he fought against it and tried to create a more masculine appearance. Did things like going to the gym to build up his body and his muscles and so on, to create a more masculine appearance. But inside, he still, in a way, felt that he was really a woman, trapped in a man's body, and wasn't too happy about that, which is, of course, why he tried to change his body in a sense, but found it didn't really make him feel any more masculine. He still felt that he was really a woman. But he now feels very strongly that he actually wants to become the woman that he now admits has always been his true identity. And he's now fairly open about that. He says he has no sexual feelings for men, but he absolutely adores women. He always has done. And especially Rachel, his wife. When he first told her about his feelings, she found it very difficult and took it very personally. She thought it was a rejection of her as a woman, in a way. But since that time, and since she's been communicating much more with Terry, she's learnt to accept Terry's feelings, and she really does believe that he loves her. So they've now agreed that Terry will have sex reassignment surgery. And soon, as a part of that process, he will begin to start living as a woman, take medication as well in that procedure. They will divorce, but they will continue to live together as two women. And of course that will continue after surgery. They hope their child will actually learn to know them as two mums, as two women, as two mums. How do you feel about Terry and Rachel's situation? What feelings does it provoke in you? What does God say to you through this? If you're a Christian, of course, and want to ask that question. So now pause the video if you can, to think through about Terry and Rachel's situation. Now another case study. Monica is 58 and she's a single woman and the director of a successful advertising company. She's also an avid anti-abortion campaigner. She often jokes about her need to be in control of situations and often of people as well. In fact, very often, if she's actually doing something in the house or somebody else's house, particularly, she would kind of leave little muddles in different places of the house, almost to stamp it as her territory a little bit. And she knows she does that in a way. She's quite self-aware, so she's aware of doing that, and then jokes about her need to be in control. She had a few relationships with men, but admits they often involved her feeling abused. In fact, she's frustrated that she often walks away from relationships with men who really seem to care for her. I mean, she obviously doesn't want to be abused, but a part of her seems to be drawn to those kind of situations. She also has many gay male friends. In fact, she's had some therapy recently, and the therapist was actually trying to persuade her not to have so many gay friends. But she said that she feels comfortable and safe with men who are gay. Her mother and sister give the impression of being very strong-minded women. Her father is also a successful businessman and facially looks much more like his daughter, Monica, than her sisters, in a sense. He really kind of resembles facially his daughter in some ways. But now, of course, we come to what you're probably already realizing is Monica's background. Monica was sexually abused by her father. She was abused from about age 9 to when she was 17. Many years of continual abuse, sexual abuse by her father. And as a result of the abuse, when she was a bit older, 17, she became pregnant. So when she was actually at university, certainly in adult education at university, I think it was, that she was aware of becoming pregnant as a result of the abuse that she was still experiencing back at home. And when she was aware that she was pregnant, she had an abortion. And I think it was a fairly horrific experience for her, which is why now, of course, she's very much anti-abortion in her campaigning. She doesn't believe that her mother or her sister know anything about the abuse. And certainly neither they nor her father know anything about her abortion. So her father has no idea that he made her pregnant. One of the cruel ironies, I don't know, it's probably not the right word to use, but one of the cruel things that happened in this particular situation is the abortion was fairly horrific, and she actually knew that the aborted child was a boy. And as it happened, her father had always wanted a boy, and he had 2 children. So in a sense, the whole secrecy, the fact that he didn't know anything about that, and presumably, as far as she knows, the rest of the family didn't know about the abuse. She's not totally sure about that, but she's pretty sure they didn't know about the abuse. All that stuff she's had to carry, as far as her family's concerned, very much on her own. Now, she shared the situation with close friends and with therapists and so on, but not with her own immediate family. How do you feel about Monica's situation? And what do you think God says to you through this? now again. Pause the video if you can, until we come to the next case study. Well, the next case study involves Simeon, who's 28. He's single and he works in a research laboratory. Simeon was an only child and his parents encouraged him to achieve academically. As a result, he spent a long time studying and had few friends. So as a child, he was very lonely. But there was one person, Tony, who did spend some time with him. He was a couple of years older than Simeon, but they seemed inseparable and often had sleepovers. They drifted apart when Simeon went to university, where he was regarded by his fellow students as very much a loner. When Simeon left university, he joined a church fellowship, and one family recognised his loneliness and they welcomed him as a part of their family. This meant a lot to Simeon, it really did. And one of their children, Matty, who's 7, he became especially close to Simeon. Simeon was really affirmed by his natural and affectionate nature. In many ways, I guess Matty was the child that Simeon would have liked to have been, or at least in a sense was never experiencing it. And Simeon started to develop strong emotional feelings for Matty. And then he was horrified to find that on occasions he felt some sexual arousal. It was a new experience for him, but he felt he must distance himself from Matty and his family. Simeon became very depressed as a result of all this, and broken-hearted in many ways. And likewise, Matty was confused and upset. He wasn't aware of Simeon's sexual feelings for him or anything like that. Eventually, Simeon plucked up the courage and explained how he was feeling to Matty's parents, who as a result were really shocked and angry. Simeon moved away from the area, but he became even more withdrawn and depressed. Eventually, Simeon took his own life. He committed suicide. Simeon's parents have no idea about the truth of this situation, but of course are grief-stricken and confused at his death. How do you feel about Simeon's situation? A very sad and painful one. What do you think God says to you through this? Simeon's case study is the last one. And of course, there could be many more, because I said right at the beginning, we all have a different sexuality, unique sexuality, and I've only pinpointed some particularly typical situations that are fictitious, of course, but nevertheless very true to life in lots of ways. I hope that it has provoked some thoughts and feelings in you that have been helpful, maybe some that you might need to work through and talk about to someone you can trust, maybe not. can I just say that if anything that I've shared has brought something to the surface in you which you're finding it very difficult to handle and cope with, then do please see someone who's qualified to help you to deal with this. So that's the end of this particular session. And in our final session of the 3, we'll be looking much more about other examples, not particularly into case studies, but other examples of sexual feelings and fetishes, and a little bit of perhaps how they may have developed. But as I've said before, I don't want to give the impression that I've got easy answers or blueprints, but simply, in a sense, want to encourage discussion and more understanding. So thanks for being with me in this session, and I hope you'll join me for the final session.